Welcome to an introduction to accounting, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. We have been looking at the subject of assets, and we're going to continue that today with the disposal of assets. So we're going to look at how we would actually record the disposal of assets. What happens when an asset is sold for cash? Obviously, we debit the cash account with the amount that we received for selling the asset, but where did the credit entry go? What happens? What's the opposite, right? We have a double entry for each transaction. So if we debit cash account, we must credit an account. Equally, what happens to the accounts for the non-current asset? We had a record of a debit in there. That amount was the historical cost. We had a record for accumulated depreciation. What's going to happen to that? Well, a summary of those transactions is recorded in a temporary account which we call a disposals account. And to balance that at the end, there's either a gain or a loss from the sale of an asset, and that's recorded in a trading and profit and loss account. So, let's see how this works out. We have an example here, Link Rail purchasing an item of rolling stock for £530,000. The accumulated depreciation on the rolling stock was £340,000 at the time that it was sold, which was for £160,000. So we need to record that disposal. So we'll go through it step by step. Initially, remember, the purchase of the rolling stock would be recorded by a debit. In this case, we've debited the non-current assets for rolling stock, and if it was paid for by cash, it would be a credit to the bank account. So that would be the initial record. Now, let's look at all the records associated with the disposal. To record the actual sale, we debit the bank account with the £160,000, and what we're going to do is start with our disposal account now, and we're going to credit the disposal account with £160,000. So we now have a double entry for the sale. Debit the bank account, credit the disposal account. Now we've got to close off that account for the rolling stock. Remember, in the assets for rolling stock we originally had a debit for £530,000. So to close it off, we've got to balance it off with a credit for £530,000. So we will credit the non-current assets rolling stock with £530,000, and we'll debit the disposal account with £530,000. So we have our second double entry. Now we can do exactly the same thing for accumulated depreciation. To close that off, we'll debit it with £340,000, and we'll credit the disposal account with £340,000. Now at the moment you can see we've got £530,000 debit in the disposal account and £500,000 as the credit in the disposal account. That's not balancing. So to balance it out, we need to add £30,000 to the disposal account. That means I need, in this case it's a credit, so I need another part for a double entry, and what I'm going to do is debit for £30,000 a gain or loss on sale of an asset account. That will be a trading and profit and loss account. If it's a debit, you might have worked out that that's rather like an expense side. Remember, expenses increase with debits, so what we've got in fact is a loss here. We're recording a loss of £30,000. So our disposal account now balanced. We debited with £530,000, and our three credits will add up to £530,000. Now we'll just take a second example. Cool Cruising, who bought the SS White Star, £250,000. The accumulated depreciation was £200,000 at the time that the ship was sold, and it was sold for £85,000. So initially, you will remember, we would have recorded a debit of £250,000 for the non-current asset of ships, and we're assuming we paid for this with cash, so we would record a credit of £250,000. So to record the sale, we received £85,000. So we will debit the bank account with £85,000. We'll credit the disposal account with £85,000. I'm now going to close off my non-current asset account. I'm going to credit it with £250,000, and I'll debit the disposal account with £250,000. So there's my double entry again. And to close off the accumulated depreciation account, I will debit that with 200,000. I'll credit the disposal account with 200,000. I have my next double entry completed. Now I have to balance the disposal account, and in order to balance it I've got 285,000 of credits, and so I need to add 35,000 worth of debits there. So I debit the disposal account with 35,000, and I'm going to credit for the gain or sale on loss of an asset. I will credit that account with 35,000. So you may have worked out that we had in fact got a gain on that sale. So we gained a total of 35,000. And just to show you, our disposal account will now balance with 285,000 debits and 285,000 credits. That ends this short podcast on disposal of assets, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. Thank you for watching and for listening.